Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I've got author Gil Broza with me today, and we're going to be talking about his new book, The Agile Mindset, which just got published today. Welcome, Gil.
Thank you. Welcome.
Great to see you again. I'm really excited for folks to be able to join us on this because personally, I come from an enterprise background, and so many people there, when we started with Waterfall, we ended with something that was agile on paper. And I think if you ran into someone at a grocery store and you asked them, are you guys agile? They would say yes, or at least the upper management would say yes. But I think it's the poor developers at the bottom who oftentimes feel like that things haven't quite gone according to the promises that Agile made. So to be honest, I'm hoping to get some insight on maybe why the great promise of the golden shining city on a hill hasn't been realized and how we can do better. Let's start. Just tell us about yourself. How did you get into software development?
Oh, the way most people do. A bit of programming in school, and then it was the early 90s. It was becoming a profession, right? I mean, software development had been a profession previously, but not a widespread one. And it looked interesting. It played to my strengths. And I guess I'm a programmer by heart.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And do you remember your first computer?
Oh, yes. A Sinclair Spectrum.
Oh,
Keys of memory. Rubber keys.
Rubber keys. You could get it wet, right?
I never tried, but 40 keys with 183 combinations of entries. A geek like me definitely like that.
Wow. Yeah, you may have needed to grow a sixth finger. I don't think I would have tried to do Emacs on that. That would have been a challenge. But yeah, mine was a Commodore VIC-20, probably around the same era, is my guess.
Oh, so you belong to the other camp then?
Oh, see, we don't want to get into a religious war right now. I've already brought up Emacs, right? We don't need to start there.
Hey, I still use Emacs.
Do you?
I still use it on a Windows version, something called Epsilon. It's
yeah.
useful. Yes.
Excellent. Great. So you started programming, and did you start off by yourself, or did you start off working in a group?
Well, I started when I was 9, and did a whole lot of that sort of on my own.
Sure.
And, right. And then, so I was still in Israel. In Israel, you join the military when you're 18. So I had 3 years of programming experience with others.
Oh.
And then it was university, and I joined a startup incubator back in Israel. So I got a pretty diverse experience with companies, various forms of software development, all possible, scales of startups, from the 2-person one to the 15-person one, and later the 300-person one. And so once I started being paid for work, I definitely experienced the team environment and the waterfall environment.
And the waterfall environment. Okay.
Yeah.
So what was your first encounter with this thing called Agile? And how did you feel about it? Do you remember?
So I remember when in 2000, I was already living in Canada. A colleague at work said, I heard about this extreme programming thing, and already the name turned me off.
Right.
A year later, however, after having been promoted to dev management and experiencing what it's like, beyond my set of tasks, I ended up at another company where they did that. And I discovered that XP was just awesome in that we were writing great code. The mechanics were simple. It was fun to be in a team. The whole automated testing bit was way cool. And and then I joined another company where I was able to run things my way. And so I got to practice with this. And so I had, I'd say 3-4 years of XP Agile before I became a full-time coach consultant.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Did you ever have to go back into a situation where you were doing Waterfall after you'd done XP already? I mean, I guess
Yes. Funny you should ask. You asked if I had to. Well, I didn't actually have to, but I sort of put myself in that situation. So after 2.5 years in that drug discovery company where I was able to, manage the bioinformatics group in an agile way, They downsized. Drug discovery is expensive, and they ran out of money. And I was looking for another position, and I looked for a place that would be receptive to, um, this amazing new structure and process that I had been privileged to be part of. And the hiring process seemed to be geared toward that. The managers seemed to be inclined to try it out. But of course, once I joined them, I realized that this was a dyed in the wool waterfall shop.
Oh,
Um, yes, one of my colleagues described it as we are 80 people, but we are organized to handle 3,000.
oh, wow. Interesting.
Yes. And so, um, yes, that did not last long.
So did it feel a little bit, I mean, I don't want to be like, I don't want to throw stones, but when you went to do the interview and you heard how things were, and then you got in there and you saw how things were, and there sounds like there was a big difference, right?
Well, maybe I was going into this with hopes and optimism that were not justified. Let's put it this way. And you know what the hiring process is like,
I
right? You
do.
never have complete information. In fact, your information is um, horribly partial.
I
So,
do.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
okay. It was a learning experience. In fact, it was such a shift away from an agile-minded process that it sort of helped me catapult to the other side and um, decide that helping people with agile ought to be my full-time profession.
Interesting. Okay, we're
Yeah.
going to come back to that. Now, we've got a
Yeah.
question from the audience about this particular situation. And
Mhm.
this person asks, how did you get to do things your own way? And I mean, how did you get that opportunity? Usually, when you join a company, you have to follow what they're doing. So,
Oh, yes.
I guess I would ask the question, that's it. Did you get to do things your own way? And if so, how?
Yes. So the person who interviewed me for the manager of bioinformatics was a director. He was an engineer. So the group belonged to the engineering department. And I guess he appreciated me enough that when I said, I am familiar with another way of managing the group that is not just with Gantt charts and long-winded promises.
Hmm.
And I've done this. I can do it here, and the results will be better. Is that of value to you? If he had said no, I would have not taken the position. Okay, so it's not like I threatened or anything like that. And it turned out that he was happy with the results, and he pretty much let me be.
So you basically pitched that, like, let me try. I'll prove it to you, right? There's wasn't a big risk for him. He let you try something different with the team.
Actually, there was a big risk for him.
Was it?
Yes, I was coming into a group that was fairly young and understaffed. The vision was to grow it. And at the time, the company was looking to really start using more custom software in the lab, really to manage lab work. And they had outsourced the construction of the main piece of software, something called a LIMS, a lab information management system. They'd outsourced that to a company that did Waterfall by the book with the usual results. 2 weeks of testing squeezed out, way over designed. The usual trouble when you have fixed costs, fixed schedule, and you know what happens to
Yeah.
testing.
Yeah.
So when I came in, the mandate was to stabilize the thing and put it in production. Now, the outsourcer had used 4 or 5 months to build it, and we needed about 4 or 5 months to stabilize it and put it in production.
Wow.
Right. So having an iterative, um, test-driven process was really helpful.
And did you realize in that moment that that was kind of your first coaching opportunity? I mean, you were gonna
No,
affect
God no,
organizational change, right?
God no.
Did you think it would be in the moment when you left the manager's office? I'm sure you felt great, right? You felt good and you got your way. He was going to let you try. And did you were you did you know how hard it would be, or did it turn out to be as hard as you feared?
Oh, it turned out to be easy.
Easy. Okay,
Easy.
well, you have the golden sauce then, because I think a lot of people listening have tried to get their management to adopt Agile in their company. How was it easy?
Remember, the thing barely had a name, right? So we talked about how this would work out, right? So we would work in short cycles, and we would plan our work collaboratively. And one of the major things was to actually work closely with the customers who were managers in the other departments in biology and chemistry and whatnot. Um, so it's not like, well, here's a package. Do you want it? Right?
Oh, I see. The capital A Agile package.
Yes. Which is what the book is about, but never mind that. So
Do,
um, it was a matter, but also, and here's another thing, because the process is iterative, you have visibility, you have transparency, you have conversations all the time. You cannot be ridiculously off track
yeah.
without people noticing. So I had one-on-ones with him. He would look at our status. I had to turn in a biweekly project status report and all that. But overall, the making this happen was relatively easy. This guy was a very meticulous engineer, but he appreciated results. The results were that the product is gradually stabilizing, and it's going to be ready to be put in production, and it's happening. The group is doing the work. No surprises, no nasty surprises in particular. Why worry?
Sure. So you do work that's very similar to that today? Well, maybe I guess that's the question. Is coaching similar to the transformational work you did at that company?
Coaching is part of the transformation. So a company will typically decide that they're interested in Agile on a set of initiatives, on a project, and a team, and so forth. Coaching will be one of the elements that helps people get comfortable and get good at this new order of things.
Okay.
There are other elements that feed into a transformation. I usually start with an assessment, which is a bit of a consulting activity. I often have training after that because there is, some subject matter to about Agile to teach, and then there is the customization and helping people through the all the mental tribulations and the hangups and the limiting beliefs and, oh my God, what am I getting myself into? Helping them through that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when you talk to your clients now, they clearly know they have a lot of expectations about what it means to be agile. There's
Mhm.
15 years worth of history here,
Yeah.
right? About outcomes and how great it is. And at least where I've worked, it was oftentimes the programmers that were bringing it upwards, saying,
Mhm.
power to us, we want to be agile, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Was it almost easier earlier on when there was less expectation or less definition around the right and wrong way to do it?
10 years ago, I still had to convince clients that it made sense. Nowadays, there is no real convincing left. People come to me and to other coaches and consultants, and they ask for it because they think of these benefits, because it's been experimented with
Sure.
on a huge scale, right?
Sure.
Exactly. And so uh, because I had to do a bit more convincing, I had to have a conversation around the outcomes and what it meant to work differently.
Ah.
Nowadays, the results are desirable. The conversations have to do with do you really mean it? And do you realize what you're getting yourself into? That's what the
What do you mean?
conversation.
What do you mean? Do you really mean it? What's that mean?
Okay, so in Agile, we have four basic values, the stuff we really, really care about, right? Adaptation, value delivery, the people before process, the collaboration with the customer. Everybody says, hey, cool, we want that. But it turns out that in many situations, they actually value other things more. So it's okay to also want to contain your costs. It's okay to have to put a contract in place. What's not okay is if those two considerations trump the other ones. If they do, Waterfall's your friend. But if you
Waterfall. Hold on. Maybe I didn't hear that right. Did you? Because I think this is recorded. Did you actually say
yes,
waterfall might be your friend?
I even said Waterfall is your friend because look, it's all about the foundational um, objectives or values or goals. What are you after? People who care to build their people more than they care to have a standardized process.
Ah,
People who value the collaboration with the customer more than they value nailing down a contract because they don't really trust the client, right?
mm.
and the other two things, right? So it has to do with what's really, really important to you. In any given work situations, many things will be important to you. If I ask you to sort them out, and I do this with my clients, and we look at what's on top, that guides the framework that we should be looking at, right? So Waterfall, for instance, what are the things we value in Waterfall? Getting it right the first time, minimizing cost and schedule, making commitments,
Okay.
and having the ability to replace the workers,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
That's one reason we call them resources. And if they go away, we'll get others that have the same technical skills, and we should be good, right?
They're like cogs. They're replaced. They're interchangeable, right?
Yes, but the thing is that when they are interchangeable, we're really looking at the project as an expense, right? And that's where we want to minimize the overall cost. We want to minimize the schedule. Somehow, quality is a secondary concern. There's a whole bunch of uh, different assumptions here. So what I'm saying is, if what you really, really value is getting it right the first time, right, and making early commitments and all that, Waterfall is designed for that, and it's fine to use it. I give an example in my book. Um, let's say I'm the chef at a restaurant. Okay,
Okay.
the
Okay.
minute I put an item on the menu, I don't know, a certain pasta dish, for instance, and I say this pasta dish has, well, these ingredients, and I play it up, and it's going to cost you $25. I have made a commitment to the guest at the restaurant.
Uh huh.
Well, once a guest orders it, Waterfall to the rescue, because I better get it right the first time.
Every time,
Exactly. I
no matter
want
who's making it.
Right. I want to minimize my costs. I want to minimize the time it takes, right? When I manage my supplies and storing them and everything, a more predictable, efficiency minded process like Waterfall is helpful to me. Okay. But if I am a marketing guy and I'm developing a new ad campaign for the restaurant, then collaboration and adaptation are a lot more useful,
Mm.
because getting an ad right the first time, I don't think that happens too much.
Okay. Yeah, and having read your book, you start with the idea of values. You say that
Yes.
values drive process, and you have a nice little section at the end of your book actually that talks about waterfall and comparing the values as you did. You gave us an overview right there. You started
Yes.
talking a minute ago and you said, "I find out if they really mean it." And I think that I understand how that flows into values. How can groups actually find out what their values are? Is it as easy as just sitting around and making a list and saying, what do we
Yeah.
value? Or sometimes do they not know, or do they have to get management involved?
Well, I usually have this conversation in a workshop, in
Okay.
a facilitated workshop, and you do need to have managers there,
Yeah.
right? No, I don't actually ask what do you value, because that's weird wording. I ask what's important to you.
Uh-huh.
What are your objectives here, right? Um, I have a client right now where what they value the most is not time or scope or something. It's data quality.
Oh,
If the project if the project finishes and the data quality is not there, it's useless.
okay. So that trumps everything. Data quality. That's
Yeah.
the driving factor. Okay. Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
we've got a question from the audience. So let's see if we can help this guy out. He says, um, my main fear about Agile, fears in quotes, is that our clients do not like having open ended progress. They like to know what will happen and when and at what cost. Currently, we try to scope out and establish realistic timelines. I'm guessing this might have been asked from someone who writes custom software for other people, for clients, a consultancy, agency, a service company, if you would be.
Yes.
What do you do
Yes.
when clients say, we need to know how much it's going to cost, when it's going to be delivered, and that is what feels more, makes them feel secure, I guess, maybe?
And sometimes it's not just secure. Sometimes it's approvals. Sometimes it's other expectations. I
Money,
get
right?
Yeah.
Budgets? Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, so I actually have several clients that are in this situation, and they all solve it different ways. So I can't really violate confidentiality, but
Of course not.
my guideline is when When you're considering an agile approach, first make sure that you and your customer actually agree to it. Agile is not just for the techies, right? It doesn't matter if you build software or just a website or a marketing campaign. It's not just for the doers, it's also for the requesters. Does your client or customer actually value the same thing?
Mm.
Do they value collaboration? Because some customers don't actually care. They just want to tell you what they want, go away, and come back when you're ready. Uh,
Yeah, I've heard software equated to people. Customers have said to me, "I don't care how the sausage is made, right? I don't want to see the all the gross stuff behind the scenes. I just want to see something that looks done, ready to
yeah,
consume, and I don't want to know." That's and I've been actually been accused when I try and bring them in of being unprofessional. Like, oh, your mechanic doesn't want you to come and look at the motor with him, and what do you say to that? Is that just not a good customer for an agile process?
or an uneducated customer.
Okay.
A lot of customers don't know that the possibility exists, that they can actually talk to technical people and not go crazy, right? Because it's not about how how the sausage is made. It's what do you want in your sausage? Do you want the sausage long or short? Do you want it this color or that color? Uh, how fast should we turn it out? Those are the questions that matter. And Agile being iterative basically says we should check in with each other fairly frequently because our ideas and preferences might change. That's all it is. The customer does not have to look under the hood.
Okay. But they do need to give feedback. And you talk about the importance of
Yes.
feedback in your book.
Yes.
In fact, one of the things I was going to ask you was you actually in the book, you really advocate hard for getting feedback from real people who have real problems in real situations, is the way
Yes.
you describe it. And how do you get that if you work in an organization that either separates you from the end users or just like we talked about, your customer isn't interested? Are there ways to sort of get that in a roundabout way, or is it a matter of realizing possibly having to come to grips with the fact that if that's the situation you're in, the values don't support agile. You can't want it more than they want it.
Right. Now, again, sometimes customers are not aware of the value of feedback or of how to give it, and a lot of times the organizations don't make it easy to give that feedback. Okay.
Mm.
If you consider some websites these days, they have this button at the bottom, and you can click it and give them feedback.
Oh yeah.
Okay. A few years ago, we didn't have that. I,
That's
I,
true.
I don't know if enough people use that. I don't know if the feedback they give is useful, but the agile thinking is, can you figure out how to get feedback? Now, in some companies, it will be a button on a website. In others, it will be calling users and just asking them. And in some organizations, that won't fly at all.
Yeah.
And you might do surveys, you might do focus groups, you might have an opt-in, opt-out mechanism. You can do A/B testing. There are lots of mechanisms. So what we say in Agile is figure out how you can get that feedback if you cannot get it, or
If you, yeah.
or if you do get it and it's worthless all the time, then you should probably do something else.
That makes sense. Another one of the questions that had come in from the list before we started was, I think it's pretty related. Is it worth even trying to implement agile while top management doesn't have an agile mindset or doesn't even understand the value of one? Is it worth trying to go down that to sell it to them? It sounds like a bit of a selling proposition to me.
It sounds like that, but the thing is, when you sell it to them, what are you after? Are you just after a cooler way to work, or are you after some right, or are you after some um, distinct, making some distinct difference?
Mm.
Okay, so in Agile, the main values we have to do with delighted customers, right? If all you want is for your customers to be satisfied because you gave them the thing they asked for on time, okay, maybe those expectations are enough for you. If you
Huh.
want to have delighted customers, and what does that mean? It means that you keep talking to them to make sure that you're solving the right needs and the right problems, and that if some things change for you or for them, you're both aware of it and you adjust accordingly. And if they have different market conditions, a disruptor, a regulation, whatever it is, you can respond to that effectively. If that's important to them, now you can have a conversation around Agile. If all they want is to, again, minimize cost and schedule and maximize predictability, Agile is not the means for that. We have other things to do that.
Okay. You mentioned this idea of delighting customers, and you talk
Yes.
about it a little bit in your book. Why would you use that word? Why is delight isn't customers that pay us or customers that don't complain? Isn't that a good enough standard?
It might be for some. Well, both you and I are self-employed. We want a higher standard, right?
That's true. And my guess is the gentleman who asked the question about dealing with the companies they service,
Yes.
he probably wants delighted customers as well.
Right. So in my case, for instance, my measure of success is if my clients want me back to help them do even better or work with other teams and other departments.
Mm-hmm.
That's a measure that something good came out of that. It's not like, oh, so we bought Agile coaching services and you delivered as per the statement of work. You know,
Yeah,
not terribly
that's pretty
interesting.
dull. You're not
Exactly.
going to get a lot of recommendations from that.
Right. So, you want to think about delight. One of the prime examples is Apple, right? People who buy Apple always buy Apple, right? Okay. In my case, I'm all in for Google products, which is the one we're using right now,
There you
right?
go.
Hangouts, YouTube, whatever it is. That goes beyond basic satisfaction.
True.
Okay. The monitor I'm looking at right now is a $150 monitor. It's 21-inch. It does the work. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. There's nothing about it that I would start a conversation over. If I
So it's
if I
good enough, but it's not noteworthy.
Right. Now, there is an interesting thing here. In Agile, we do like to say, look for the good enough. Why do we want to look for the good enough? Because it might be just what the customer needs to address the problem or the need, right? So that you can be freed up to do something else. I
Look,
bought a good enough monitor so I can free my money for other things.
look for the good enough. I mean, I see a lot of guys who are great programmers who are creating brilliant, huge, complex architectures for things that honestly was way overkill for what the customer needed and how often it would get used. Is that what you're addressing when you say look for the good enough?
So implementing just enough or too much would be an example of that. Okay. But it's also how much of the thing do you build? So let's take an example, Craigslist. Okay. Incredibly popular, right? They seem to make a good living off it.
Right.
Um, I don't know if any people in user experience design who are terribly impressed by Craigslist, but it does the work.
Yeah.
And you know what? If that's all they need, and the users actually will still use it, and you still have the benefit, that's worth considering.
Yeah, and they come back and it grows in popularity, right? I mean, I don't think yeah, no, and that example of user experience people have hated it for years because they felt it was so ugly, while the rest of us just went on to post our cars on there and we're happy as a clam when we sold our cars and it loaded super fast on our phones, right?
Yes. So good enough only means that we're looking for a subset of the ideal solution or an alternative to the ideal solution that is still worth paying for, doesn't jeopardize our future commitments and abilities,
Uh-huh.
and allows us to move on.
Okay.
That
And
yeah.
does the Agile team who identifies what a potential candidate for a good enough solution is, do they bring that to the client or the manager and say, look, we know you want this thing, but we think that this much might get you started and add value. And we're going to have a conversation about that.
Yeah, so a lot of times the team will suggest that, but again, if both the team and the customer um, both agree that Agile is their preferred mode,
Right.
then the customer can come up with that as well.
Sure.
It's perfectly ordinary to see product owners, for instance, say, I asked you for this story. I would still want it. But you know what? If you could find me something simpler for half the price, I'll take it.
I'll take it. You break that thing into two, and you can go with one, and I'll pay for the other one later, and I'll get the value of the smaller piece now.
Yeah.
We've got another question from the audience. It's about it's actually about companies that use separate test teams from the core Agile development team. And it goes like this. Can you go over the value of a separate Agile testing team as part of the process? I've worked with organizations that thought that testing by a separate team was ineffective and unnecessary. They felt unit testing and user acceptance testing were enough. What's your view? Where do you fall on that, Gil?
Okay. So first, let's look at testing. Testing is a learning activity, right? It's not just a confirmatory activity. Unit tests definitely help a lot with both. So does acceptance testing. Usually it's not enough. It depends on the type of software that you're creating, but quite often you do need a third level of testing, which is more the type of testing we would associate with not the developers, not the product owner, but QA.
Okay.
And my preference is for them to use exploratory testing, the kind that critiques the product and explores it for various aspects, ideas, and anticipated stuff, and so on. Um, so my Agile QA is different.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, I mean, some products do need a battery of tests, and if you haven't automated them, you'll need to do them manually. It happens. I have a client right now where that's exactly the case. Fine. However, having separate teams do the testing basically creates a longer feedback loop, and that's the main risk, right? So you can have your team create stuff, but they're not quite sure what they've broken and what side effects they've created and what damage they've done that they have not caught with their own tests.
And so you actually would not say that a separate group would be the right way. The feedback loop is too long. But on the other hand, unit tests may simply not be sufficient. That the development group, as an organization responsible for the software, has to perform other activities that maybe they have to change their mindset. If you're a programmer, you might have to act like a tester for 5 hours a week. Act like a tester if you put on that hat, if I
Yes.
could just say that.
Um, yes. And the way I look at unit tests, I also teach Agile engineering. The unit tests I teach are not the traditional style that you had, well, that I had when I was in a waterfall environment, and unit meant the stuff that had my name on the Gantt chart, right? So
Oh,
nowadays, unit tests, really, this is what we have in XP. The unit tests are small, they're focused, they're simple, they only look at one micro behavior at a time. When you look at them this way, they're fantastic for driving low-level design. They're fantastic for the taking of breakage and so on, but because they're so myopic, you cannot get system-level answers from them. They're not designed for that. They're designed for something else. User acceptance testing gives you a little bit of end-to-end, again, acceptance, but not quite verification. So you
right.
do need to supplement that with a bit of verification and exploration by human beings in order to make sure that you have kept your product in a shippable and no side effects state.
And that work should be done by the development team.
By the Agile team, I don't call them development team.
Okay, by the Agile team.
Just because the word development tends to signify programming.
Yeah.
Right. So the Agile team has the delivery team in it, right? So they would be the delivery team. I want my testers on the delivery team because of the short feedback loop, the communication, collaboration, the host of other principles, right? If they're in a separate groups, in a separate group, how do you coordinate with them? What do you do with what they find? How early do you get to it, right? Then you start triaging and postponing, doing a whole bunch of stuff, right? And documenting way more than you would have to if those people could just talk to each other.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay, well, I wanna ask about Agile remote teams.
Hmm.
So is this, I have read Kent Beck's stuff, and I've read a lot of the Agile stuff, and it seems like it all was born out of this idea of communication, collaboration, Let's get the customer literally at the time, like right next to us,
On
right?
site, yes.
On site with them. And yet, 2015, I mean, remote teams, I mean, they're everywhere, right? All kind, and companies that have co-located teams are adding remote members. How do you, well, first of all, I guess I would say, is it possible, or what strategies, maybe that's a better question. What strategies would you recommend for teams that are actually doing Agile, but have a very distributed team?
The first thing I would look at is how they are distributed.
Okay.
If you have 7 people in the same office and 1 off-site, that's usually not great for teamwork. I have not seen that work. Okay.
Now say that again. If you have 7 people that are off-site from the
No,
main.
no. 7 people who are together.
Okay.
Place, right? And 1 person on that team is remote to them.
Ah, got it. So you've got a group that has high cohesion and one guy who just is on Slack or Skype or Google Hangouts.
For instance. No, people work from home or they've moved state or whatever it is. I have not seen that to contribute to good teamwork.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, the remote person may still be an excellent contributor and, be, disciplined and all that. I get that. But as far as teamwork is concerned and the communication patterns inside of the group, that usually doesn't work all that well. Because we do want a team-based environment. The team is the unit that turns ideas into delivered products. And, out of sight, out of mind. I can think of exceptions to that, but the cost that everybody on the team incurred in order to get the remote person included, that just was too much.
Okay.
Now, if most of your people are in different offices, or your team is essentially almost entirely distributed, that can be just fine, right? So you collaborate over the internet, and you use electronic tools. You don't use the stickies. That's fine. It's still important to meet in person every now and then, because there's nothing like a personal connection.
Right.
I mean, I have never seen you in anything but pixels, right?
Right. Light on a monitor. Yep.
Yeah. And you look nothing like your LinkedIn picture, as far as I'm concerned.
You're very kind.
No, I mean, unless I actually meet you in person, and maybe we even eat together, then I don't know what it's like to work with you. So you and I, we're being open about this, and we're being very collaborative. But that also has to do with the fact that we were introduced to each other by a trusted party. Right?
That's exactly right. I, for example, have no idea what the back of your head looks like.
Ah, and I shouldn't turn because it's balding.
But you're right. We don't know each other other than the face that we put forth in these very specific. It's entirely different than if we were sitting there having a meal, actually communicating, actually like getting to know each other. There is some communication occurring here, but it's nothing like what happens in real life.
Right. And consider what happens in a company. The people who are considered part of a team generally didn't ask to be a team with those people. I mean, in many cases it works out. In many cases it's a disaster. But you didn't get to choose them.
Yeah.
Right? So when you reached out to me and said, well, can we have an interview? I had a choice. Most of the people who watch us, or most of the people who will consider Agile, the people they work with, they've had no say in the matter.
It's true.
Consider if those colleagues are also elsewhere. Sometimes they don't show up. You don't know why. They give you a reason, and maybe you're not quite so sure. Some of them prefer chat. Some of them prefer Skype. There's such an overhead that it gets really hard to develop a true relationship that will make teamwork successful.
And
hold on, I'm not saying it's not success. It's not possible. It's just hard, and it takes time.
That equates to money.
It equates to money, but it also means that eventually, if it doesn't take place quickly enough, people will give up.
Oh.
I was part of a remote team for several years ago, and there were a few people who were like, bosom buddies. Anytime I reached out to them over Skype, we talked. It was awesome. And there were other people on the team who did not reciprocate. I would ask a question and not get an answer, right? They would rarely start a conversation with me. That was that did not give our team a cohesive feel. There was actually the feeling of a click, to be honest, between the people who did communicate and the people who did not.
So instead of everybody being remote, sort of creating an equal playing field, the fact that you as a team generally lacked trust amongst all the different members meant that people formed the cliques or stood alone, very much like a high school experience.
So trust was one thing. But you know what? Thinking about that particular experience, I don't think that trust was the only thing. Some people just did not really care to be in a team.
Oh, I see.
And the same, by the way, is true of many others, right? Some people are team players. Some people relish the company of others, and some not that much.
I know when I worked at a large organization, you could all if you would get your team together in a room and you would talk to them, and maybe you were the leader, maybe you were a member, and whatever topic came up, you could look around and tell just from body language if people were interested and were excited about it. And online, it's very difficult, and you sort of start with the default. I guess I know I make the mistake oftentimes of starting with the default approach of clearly you're going to be excited about this because you're not typing I hate this idea into your chat window, right?
Yeah.
But in the same way as the person in the meeting never said I hate this idea, they just slouched in their chair and looked out the window and played on their phone. They gave me all the signals they hated the idea. I just can't see them when I'm remote, and so therefore I'm not actually communicating. We're not transmitting those signals back and forth to be able to work together properly.
Right, and even with cameras, right? Both of us are using cameras right now. The technology is pretty good, and still, I'm not seeing you entirely clearly. Um, it's not entirely the same thing.
No,
It,
no,
it's just not.
that's very true. Okay, so we have a question from the audience. What qualities and skills should product owners develop to be effective on an agile team?
Oh, oh, it's a long list.
Is that a long list? That's a whole book, huh?
Well, some of it is in my earlier book, right?
That's
Um,
true.
the Human Side of Agile.
Which is over your
Ah,
shoulder.
it is, yes. Yes. So skills and qualities. They need patience. They need critical thinking. They need communication and collaboration skills. Obviously, they need to understand the business. Um, I mean, they need to be empowered and available, but those are not skills and qualities. Um,
True.
Communication, I think, is the biggest deal.
Communication.
The,
Okay.
the ability to communicate a need or problem or a solution or an alternative or rationale, those are big. I had a client last year where the product owner got into situations with the team that were really unpleasant. He was asking them for stuff and saying, "Oh, we need to do this and we need to do that," and the smoke cleared the minute he explained why he wanted stuff.
Hmm. The reasons, the values,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I asked you to do X because when we do that, it makes this thing happen and the other thing happen. Now, you might think it's obvious, but few people actually bother to consider the why. A lot of things are just a given.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Um, let's talk a little bit about the book. Why did you write it? What were you hoping to achieve? What need did you want to fill?
So there are three needs that I wanted to fill. One is I think people have an incomplete and an inaccurate picture of Agile. Too many people care too much for process, and you can have an agile process, but without the thinking behind it, it won't work. You'll go through the motions, you'll have stuff at the end of an iteration, but it's not quite what you really hope to get.
Yeah, I've experienced that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that. The you know giving a clear and accurate picture is also important, because a lot of organizations, like we said at the beginning, they want Agile, but they don't really understand what they're getting themselves into,
Mm-hmm.
right? For instance, collaboration. A lot of people have no clue that it's actually distinct from cooperation. And yeah, and collaboration, when you work together and jointly owning the result, this is a big deal. But you don't measure it on a Gantt chart. You do not measure it with individual productivity. You don't measure it actually, um, right? But it's meant to drive effectiveness, right? If you still want efficiency and you're not getting it because your people collaborate, is that a good thing or a bad thing? A lot of people don't know how to answer that. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's one. And the third reason is that 2015, so many agile implementations out there are just mediocre or worse, and the people who have those implementations don't actually know why that is.
Mm,
And they try to find best practices, which is false hope. And they look for better tools, right? And they rejig their teams and they try a whole bunch of stuff, and it still doesn't work, and they don't know why. So I want to address the balance of agile as a paradigm, as a um, mentality, as an approach, which is not always suitable. But
yeah.
if it is suitable for you and you've decided to use it, here's how it's meant to be. So the book is not about a specific process. It does not teach you how to do Scrum. There are a million books about that. In fact, the word Scrum appears there maybe 4 times. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
because I also don't think that Scrum is the right answer for everything. There are situations where it's useful and situations where something else would be more useful.
So the mindset though, and knowing your values, for example, and
Yes.
knowing what you and your manager and your client actually care about,
Yes.
that's what should drive your process, because you're
Yes.
going to have pressure from those values. If you choose not to acknowledge them,
Yes.
you may find yourself in a difficult position.
Yes. So what I say in the book is that you start with the values, just like you said. You start with the values, then you also examine your beliefs and assumptions. One foundational Agile belief is that it's probably not responsible to expect our customer to pinpoint a future need.
Yeah.
And a lot of other assumptions fall out of that. So there is a line of thinking around people, around the work, around the work's customer. For instance, why does Agile want self-organizing collaborative teams? Okay, if you ask people, a lot of them won't know to tell you. They'll say, "Well, that's just how it is," right? It's probably a good idea,
That's
right?
better somehow, right?
Right. So the line of thinking in Agile, in the mindset, is because we're human, we're not resources, right? We're human, and therefore we will get stuff wrong, and we'll get a lot of things wrong.
Mm,
Even if we're right, we're not perfect. But if we put people together, we can expect them to sort of catch each other doing the wrong stuff and enrich the outcomes when they are right. So this is an assumption. You can't actually prove that. There's some research and a lot of anecdotes and empirical studies and whatnot, but either you accept this or you don't,
it's
right?
sort of a life belief, right? People are going to get things wrong
Yeah,
and they're going to try hard, and you'll get it wrong less when you work together towards the same goal and you communicate.
right. And whenever you are right, you'll do better if you work with others.
Sure.
So this is the agile line of thinking around people. Okay, and the other belief that falls out of that is that when you put people in a cross-functional and collaborative team, that mitigates the downside and it elevates the upside. Again, you cannot prove that. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but this is one of the assumptions that Agile is built on. If you hear this and you're saying, no, 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 the way to mitigate the downside and elevate the upside is by having a really, really knowledgeable technical lead oversee everybody, review their code, tell them what to do, whatever,
Right.
then you're going to have trouble with the next element of the mindset, which is the principles that guide your design of the process,
Ah,
right?
yeah.
So the third element of the mindset, which is the I guess the more comprehensive one, is the principles. right? Agile has 26 of them. That is a lot,
Yeah.
right? It's not that simple. You cannot present it in 10 minutes, okay? Um, and if you like the values and you agree with the beliefs, then you have all these principles to guide how you approach work. That is the mindset.
I remember hearing somebody tell me a long time ago that the actual outcome of an agile process is an agile team. That somehow the software was, it's important, but that the fact that you had built an agile team, these people who work together, there was some sort of like underlying secondary or maybe even primary outcome. Have you heard that before?
I haven't heard that, but I actually wrote something similar in the book. And one of my reviewers said, I've never actually heard it phrased quite this way.
Oh,
There's a whole chapter that's called Working Better, which is about continuous improvement. And a lot of people think that the goal of continuous improvement is to deliver more value and increase your effectiveness and your efficiency, and that's great. But I think that there is a more significant goal, and that goal is to build a solid team.
mm,
A solid team is one that the organization can rely on as an asset, really, to reliably deliver value within normal parameters. I mean, considering all the change that organizations go through, their themselves, their clients, their technology, their teams, and so on, a solid team is the asset.
yeah,
Such a team will deliver value and will be effective and will get better over time.
yeah.
So I guess my suggestion is to focus more on building a solid team than on just getting them to a really good place with their process. I even have a whole workshop on this. It's called Grow a Solid Agile Team. It's all
Ironic
about,
somehow.
well, that's where I picked the name, right? Because and really all it's about is about servant leadership. Because a lot of teams do not just spontaneously erupt into high performance, right? They need servant leadership to take them there.
No, that's exactly right. In fact, there was also a question in advance about servant leadership, and the person asked, "What's the relationship between the agile mindset and servant leadership?" Clearly, there's a lot of overlap. Where are they the same, and where are they different? And is there any conflict between the two?
There's no conflict, but the mindset, the agile mindset, includes a principle that is servant leadership. And the principle basically says that these are the leaders who grow those solid teams in a humane and trusting and supportive environment. Um, so when you put teams together this way, you need to have servant leadership present.
Mm.
Quite often that will be like the Agile team lead. That's really who the previous book is for. So
Uh-huh.
the human side of Agile is all about servant leadership. And so it's one of the principles. There's no conflict. There's no yeah. One
It's
is
one of the 26. Would you say?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. So I want to ask you a question that I faced a lot when I owned a software company. I owned a company, and we wrote software for other people. I suspect there's some in the audience who have that same situation. And we were small, and we wanted to be cool. So of course we wanted to be agile, right? And we wanted to build the team, build the organization. We were cross-functional. We were co-located all in one building, sometimes in one room, right? But we kept running into this problem of finding clients that wanted a lot more certainty. And the more I read, certainty around time and budget, as we talked, not terribly unreasonable things as you're going to shop for something. But I remember thinking that there was some like values within our company around the way we were going to work. And when clients would come in, during the first meeting, you could just tell when there was a mismatch of values. And I remember at first what I would try and do is educate people. And then, frankly, if I was really hungry that month, I might try and figure out how to make it work, which, by the way, never actually worked for me. Okay. So at some point, what I tried to do was to get those people to go away as fast as possible, because I lost faith in trying to actually sell them or convince them. I mean, sometimes we could, but I guess if you're a company and you feel like these are your values, if you're a person, a leadership team, and you feel like Agile resonates with you from a values perspective, is it a matter of just trying to avoid clients and not work with clients that do that? Or how much work do you think should go into convincing clients that it's the one true, that it's the way that you're going to best serve them? It's a big question.
Yes. You have a presupposition in there that it is, in fact, a better way to service them.
You're absolutely right.
And
you're absolutely right, because, yep.
I would question that. It's your assumption, and you may very well be right, and I would love for you to be right, but there are a lot of clients who don't think that way.
That's true. I wanted it to be a job that, like, I wanted it to fit me sometimes more than I cared how it fit them.
So let me give you an example. When I worked on the previous book, and now getting into the print version of the second book, I had to have a designer and an editor. I actually had two editors, and other service providers who helped in the making of it once I had the text.
Yeah.
Everybody I interviewed when I was looking for those professionals basically expected a waterfall type of process. They expected us to identify requirements, which typically would be fairly obvious given the nature of the work, that we would agree to a timeline. There would be a fixed budget, and with a little bit set aside for contingency, and there would be one review cycle. And I said, I just don't work this way, right? And how can I, with a straight face, write a book about Agile but not work the same way with you? And besides, it was important to me, right? For instance, with my designer, right? I mean, how can you do a single pass design, right? So the designers set this expectation because they were used to it. I actually had to spend some time with them saying, look, I prefer this other way because of A, B, and C, right? And I know that something has to give, right? And I realize that what has to give here is that you might spend more time and therefore charge me more.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly happy to pay you more if I like the result better, right? We have a general sense of how much it's going to be, right? So how much would it take to lay out a book of 350 pages? Okay, about this much. Okay, margin of error, this and that. Okay. And we worked out a process like this. And it was sort of similar with many of them in that we had iterations. They were not time boxed, but we had cycles, we had feedback. It was collaborative. And, every now and then they would ask me, this is going to, cause me to work more hours and you'll pay for that, right? And I said, yeah, okay, go ahead. Because it was the one constraint I cared the least about, right?
Yeah.
My leading constraint was quality. When you manage with Waterfall, quality falls out, right? So I prefer to go the other way. Quality came first, and time and scope actually was second. And if it took longer, it took longer. That's one reason I had two editors.
And if it cost more, it cost more. Because
and it did cost more, but I'm happy with the result. So what I'm saying is when you have clients, you can have a conversation like this with them. Right? It could be that whether the service providers or the customers, they ask for a predictive process because that's what they know, that's what they're comfortable with.
Sure.
Even if sometimes it leaves a lot to be desired, but that's just how it works.
Do you, I used to try, so when I would try and sell customers on the Agile way as being, assuming that they were very focused on quality. So we would oftentimes work with startups and they would say, we want to serve this market. This is the kind of thing. And whenever I saw the hand moving, that was a nice way of saying, we kind of know, but really don't know what we want, but we want fantastic, delightful things, right? So I would use this analogy, and I'm curious if you think it's correct or not, because I don't think I've ever really talked about it. I would say what you're asking for has never been done before, because frankly, it's an act of invention to some extent, right? If you could go buy it off the shelf, and when I bought software in the old days, Sears had it or Kmart or but if you could go buy it, wouldn't you? And they would say, well, of course it doesn't exist. It's brand new. And I'd say, so there's an element of the unknown. And let's just jointly face the fact that even as a professional, I can't predict the future. And I used to equate it to this. I'd say if you wanted somebody to find you the fountain of youth, right? This mythical thing that sits in the jungle, would you hire an Arctic guide to take you there or a jungle guide? And I said, of course, you'd hire a jungle guide. And he would say, I don't know exactly where it is, but I know how to fight the lions and I know how to sleep in the
Yes.
jungle. And I have all the right jungle tools, but I'm not good with polar bears and I don't swim in the ice. And so I said, a lot of, for when you're evaluating people, you have to recognize people, companies to work with. You have to find ones that are the most fit for the kind of thing you want to do, that have some track record, but you can't expect they're going to know exactly where to take you the first
Yes.
time. There's a lot of wandering around on the map. Is that acknowledging the unknown? Do you think that's appropriate, or was that maybe I was just copping out because I really didn't know and I didn't want to do the hard work to think, to estimate it in advance?
Well, the whole estimation thing also assumes some certainty, right? Yeah.
Sure.
Look,
Yeah.
look. Agilists are said to not to bother making commitments, right?
Right.
Which is a lousy reputation to have, because it's not that they don't want to make commitments because they're lazy or incompetent, right? They don't want to make commitments because they think it's not in your best interest,
Yeah,
right?
I didn't want to commit to that person. I could do it in 3 months because then they would be very sad and probably mad at me
Right,
and they would feel like everything failed.
right. But as a professional, you can say, look, if we kind of guessed here and waved our hands long enough, then it might be in this range,
Right.
right? How much are you willing to pay for this?
Right.
Right. And quite often, in Agile, we turn the question from estimating how much something would cost to, well, how much are you willing to pay for it?
So budget.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
How much do you want to spend?
Yes. So if I'm building a new website, how much is it worth to me?
Yeah.
Right. I can go to various agencies and they will quote me a job, but I can also start the conversation by saying, look, as long as assuming I trust them, right? This is worth, right. Assuming this is worth $2,000 for me, what can you get me for that? Without too many specifics, okay? But here's generally what I had in mind. So this is why we often start projects with a chartering activity, right? It far exceeds stories and epics and such, and it looks at, what are you trying to achieve here,
Yeah.
right? That alone is very very useful.
No, absolutely. And I found that if somebody could trust me enough to tell me how much they wanted to spend and what they hoped to gain from it, I found we almost always could deliver something that met their needs in the, you can change the idea of quality or scope. I mean, there's a lot of other variables that if the price
Yes.
is the thing, there's a whole lot of other, and they're willing to talk to you about it. There's a whole lot of other ways you can actually make them very happy. So I always, yeah, no, I think that's great.
I like to tell my providers how I prioritize the constraints. Which one is most important to me and which one is next?
Okay. Now that seems like one of those things that finding out what they value and finding out what their constraints are and upfront, that seems pretty smart, especially for a company who makes their living providing software for other people.
Yes.
So, Gil, thank you so much. Where can we find your book? Where can we find you? Where can we find your services? Tell us about that.
Okay. So the two books are The Human Side of Agile.com.
Okay.
So
Got it.
where is it?
It's
Here.
right there.
Right here. Wait. Okay. So if you didn't catch this, here it is. Okay. The second one is going to print soon, but it's available electronically. So if you read electronically, go to theagilemindset.info.
Okay.
And the website for my services is at 3pvantage.com.
3pvantage.com. And there you provide coaching and consultation services for teams that want to improve and companies that want to deliver great things.
Yes. So if you're interested in Agile and you've started and you want to do better, if you've started and it's broken and you want to fix it, if you haven't started, I got you covered.
Awesome. Gil, thank you so much. Pleasure to talk today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.